Hello, all. Since you seem to like my reading of my story, The Materializing Mega City, I thought I'd read you my first Eric of Marylebone story. Um, just give a little background. In around 2010, uh, I read something funny in one of Michael Moorcock's End of Time stories. One of his characters, I believe it was Werther de Goth, I'm not sure, said, about something, what would his hero, Eric of Marylebone, done? Obviously, that was a parody on Elric of Melniboné, but I asked Moorcock, kind of in a joking manner, can I write a story about Eric of Marylebone for this year's story challenge? And he said, yeah, sure, go ahead, write it. Um, I just want to preface this. This is just a work of fan fiction. I do not hold any of the copyrights. They all belong to Michael Moorcock, but I still enjoyed this story, and I was really kind of pleased. I just reread it the other day, and I've forgotten how well it's actually written, and I hope you'll enjoy it as well. So here we go. The Fewer the Better, a tale of Eric of Marylebone and Asquith of Albiona, as chronicled by White Wolf for 359. 1. Ballroom Blitz, London, July 10th, 2144 AD. Eric pulled his gray plastic Mac tighter around his thin, pale shoulders and shivered in the summer rain. London was a wet, dark city, the perfect place for an albino nightclub hound like Eric. He was headed to a new S&M slash dance slash sex club in the Marylebone Road called Mad Valerie's Rubber Rage. He knew Valerie. She was a gorgeous, buxom blonde dominatrix from Kensington Road who liked to dress in a bright purple catsuit and rubber horse head to freak guys out. She was pretty mad, all right, but his kind of mad. She was also his aunt and sometime lover. He arrived at the door of his aunt's new club, which was a burnt-out storefront, formerly a bakery, at 12:30. The blare of a vicious scratch punk band called the Viral Vixens pounded his ears the moment he stepped through the crimson door. The ticket taker was an old friend of his, a fat, pretty punk girl with green hair, an impressive bosom, and chrome teeth named Julie Jade. He smiled and handed her his gold-engraved hologram invite card. Eric, she laughed. Her breath smelled of Cheetos and cheap wine. How you been, old darling? Ain't seen you around since the Leather Lounge burnt down 6 months ago. Been staying out of trouble, Eric lied to his old friend. How's it going in here? Opening night a hit so far? Crazy, Julie replied. He watched her curvy rump wriggle seductively under her tight black vinyl trousers as she led him up a rickety staircase. Mind you, your Aunt Val ain't half got the punches wild with the latest gig. She's not wearing that stupid rubber horse head again. Eric winced in private. In private, the horse gear was kind of hot. In public, it was an embarrassment. Orsed ain't got nothing on this new kit, Julie Jade laughed. You ain't seen nothing like, guaranteed. The bar and dance floor was crammed into a tiny upstairs room that had once housed baking supplies. It still smelled like flour dough, but a ghastly mixture of floury perfume, sweat, and hot vinyl accosted Eric's nostrils as they entered. The tiny space was packed with warm bodies. Eric squeezed past a muscle hunk in leather pants and cowboy boots holding a leash attached to a slim blonde boy in a French maid's uniform and a spiked dog collar. He shoved through two fat dominos in canary yellow and electric blue catsuits, each with matching high-heeled boots. He jostled past two slender punk boys kissing and rubbing each other's bums to reach a vantage point where he could see the stage. The Viral Vixens throbbed out a nouveau thrash version of Anarchy in the UK, while his aunt, lovelier than ever in an insanely tight black vinyl catsuit with red and orange flaming hearts painted over each of her perfect 44 triple D breasts, danced a hypnotic, hip-wriggling punk mambo. A huge flame was painted over her luscious crotch. She wriggled her hips and shook the quote-unquote best butt in Britain. She had a cat-o'-nine-tails whip in her left hand, which she cracked down for her adoring crowd of slaves and oglers. She kicked at them with her wicked stiletto-heeled thigh boots and laughed. She looked zonked, no doubt on one of the new designer drugs. He wasn't sure she even saw him. Her eyes had that glazed-over look. Don't your auntie look gorgeous? Julie asked the pale young man. She always looks gorgeous, Eric said, but I think she's stoned beyond belief. Could be, love, Julie said. Want a shag in the coat closet? Yeah, all right, Eric replied. He hadn't gotten laid in a long time. Julie might be fat, but she was a great lover. Half an hour later, Eric stumbled back onto the crowded dance floor. His auntie was still holding court, but this time she spotted him. Eric, darling, she screamed over the punk band. Come here and give your old auntie a kiss. He was helped up onto the stage platform by four leather-clad boys and landed at her feet. She dragged him up to his feet and kissed him hard, her lips bruising his. The crowd roared as she ground her hips into Eric's groin. She leaned over and whispered into his ear, Get out of here now, but meet me later at my Edgware Road pad. Auntie Valerie purred. I've got a brand new strap-on that matches this outfit, and I need your hot ass to break it in. Auntie Valley, you're incorrigible, Eric laughed. I'll be there. They danced for a few more seconds, then she viciously shoved him off the stage into the crowd. Two leather lesbians caught him and stood him on his feet. Eric shoved past and squeezed through the crowd of sex-crazed punks and finally made it out the door. He gasped in the cold night air. He was wondering if his auntie's lipstick had been dosed with stims or hallucinogens. The world seemed to have an odd lime-green tinge. He shook his head, and the strangeness cleared, so he figured it was just pheromone rage. Eric ambled along Baker Street, heading north. As Eric ambled along Baker Street, heading north, he heard an odd noise. It was a low rumble, like a big lorry engine, but it was coming from the sky. He looked up but saw nothing but rain clouds. Eric heard the mysterious engine growl growing closer and closer. Then it sputtered. A horrible memory flooded into his mind. It was a V1, a buzz bomb. But how could that be? This was 2144, not 1944. Instinct and ingrained fear took hold of the albino punk rocker. His auntie had told him stories about the Blitz. She hadn't been born, but her mum's mum had been through it. He knew when the sputtering noise stopped, the bomb was going to fall and explode, causing untold chaos. Eric ran down the underground steps of Baker Street Station with a wild abandon, knocking aside an old woman and two ragged children. He jumped over the turnstile, ignoring the shouts of the station bobbies. He bolted down the escalator steps to the deepest level of the subway platform. He screamed, "Buzz bomb!" and the passengers hit the floor, covering their heads. Then the world exploded. The flash was so brilliant it blinded him. He could see nothing, feel nothing. He heard screams and felt the station shake as the V1 exploded, its deadly warhead penetrating the street above and bringing down buildings on their heads. Ceiling tiles burst all around him like ceramic grenades. When his vision finally cleared, Eric was no longer on the train platform. He was standing in an unfamiliar street surrounded by buildings that seemed more organically grown than constructed. They were brilliant pastel colors, crimson, violet, cerulean, teal, cinnamon, blood orange, and their shape was vaguely like the shapes of women. The air stank of ozone, and as he looked up, he saw a dozen zeppelins with strange markings patrolling the skies above. Eric had an odd feeling that despite the weird buildings, airships, and ozone, he was still in Baker Street. It just wasn't the same Baker Street. He'd known. He was still in London, but not his London. He had little time to wonder about his surreal transportation to this alternate world, where as he stood contemplating the mystery of how he'd gotten here, he heard a thundering noise from the north. Bearing down on him at breakneck speed was an army of armored women on steeds that looked like enormous blue tigers with 8 legs. 2. Queen of Pain. Queen Asquith of Albiona saw the pale youth materialize on the Queen's Road, just as it had been written in the Crimson Chronicle. She spurred her tigress, Salitha, on down the Emerald Mews toward the stunned-looking albino. "Stow your pikes," she called to her royal dragoons. The column of armored warriors put up their pikes and slowed their tigers to a trot. The young man threw up his arms and shouted something in a strange tongue that Asquith could not fathom. There were sounds of Albionic about it, but it was twisted and warped and filled with idioms of his own time. "Sorceress Alira," she called to her ranks. A warrior in gray armor and a white cloak slowed her tiger to a halt and dismounted. Sorceress Alira bowed to her queen king and kissed the hem of her lilac robe. "How may I be of service, my liege?" Alira asked. "Tell me, sorceress, is this the legendary savior of Albiona, the pale warrior whose arrival was predicted by the Crimson Chronicle of the Mad Queen Tiana 10,000 years ago?" The voice of the Queen King Asquith asked beneath her dragon helmet. "Yes, I believe it to be the eternal champion, Eric of Marylebone, called by some woman's slave and kin layer but also the bearer of the red sword Fire Spitter, who shall save Albiona from the dark forces of the Franco-Belgian matriarchy, Alira replied. Spare me the history lesson, Queen King Asquith said. Tell me what that gibberish he's speaking means. I don't know, Alira said, but he has been transported from his own universe into ours. It may take his brain time to adjust to our speech. Truss him up and throw him over my saddle, Queen Asquith commanded. We shall sort these mysteries out in the safety of Bletchley Manse. Two of the woman warriors stepped forward. One of them clouted the young man on the back of the neck with her armored gauntlet. He collapsed into the arms of the second woman, who, with the help of the first, tied his arms and legs and threw him over the broad back of King Asquith's tiger. They secured him behind her saddle's cantle and strapped him down tight. Asquith scratched her tiger's ears and kicked her into a gallop. The armored column raced down the broad boulevard toward Bletchley Manse. 3. Teenage lobotomy. Eric's head felt as if someone had been using it as a cricket ball. He figured he passed out from exhaustion at his Auntie Val's rave club, and some kind soul had carried him to a warm bed somewhere. He blinked his eyes and opened them. Painful sunlight filtered through the dark gray curtains. The room was huge and smelled like lilacs. He couldn't place himself. Where was he, and how had he gotten here? He pushed himself up onto his elbows. Time to take stock of the situation. He was in a big room that looked like something straight out of an Elizabethan costume drama. The walls were flocked with red velvet, and there were some tapestries that looked ancient hanging on them. They depicted knights in battle with strange creatures. There was a huge gilt mirror and a matching ornate dresser on one wall, and a steam radiator by the bed. Steam? Nobody'd used steam and heat in centuries. Eric lay contemplating his surroundings. As Eric lay contemplating his surroundings, a woman swept into the room from an unseen door. She was tall, lean, and tan. She was dressed in a silver leather catsuit with white and blue stars painted on it, and a silver and dark gray cloak draped her thin, round shoulders. Long hair the color of midnight, blue-black, flowed down over her shoulders. Though her face was partially hidden by a silver domino mask, Eric could tell she was quite lovely, with a heart-shaped face, round chin, full cheekbones, and Roman nose. She had a white plastic serving tray with her, and on it were several glasses with strange-colored liquid that resembled water, but might be vodka. She mixed several of the glasses, muttering some bizarre words in a language Eric did not recognize, and then drank about half a glass. She handed the other to Eric. He took it from her silver-gloved hand and sniffed it, reluctant to drink. It did not smell of almonds, so he did not think the drink was laced with arsenic. Still, he had to consider. At last he drank. If this was, after all, just an illusion brought on by Auntie Valerie's lipstick hallucinogens, what did it matter if he drank the potion or not? The liquid tasted awful, like melon juice mixed with sour milk, but he found that it also made him feel less lightheaded. What was that? Eric asked the strange nurse. Moonbeam water, the lovely woman replied. Now we can converse properly. All right then, Eric said. Let's get to it, darling. Who are you? Where am I? How did I get here? And what do you want with me? You are very precise, the gray-cloaked attendant said. I am Sorceress Alira, spiritual advisor to Queen King Asquith. You are in Bletchley Manse, her southern estate. You arrived by walking the moonbeam roads between the worlds, or were, perhaps, propelled by multiversal forces. You are Eric of Marylebone, champion eternal, and it is your destiny to save the Empire of Albiona from the clutches of the Franco-Belgian matriarchy. Queen King Asquith herself is depending on you, Sir Champion. Me, a champion? Eric laughed. I came last in football and cricket at school. I'm scarcely a champion, love. I can hardly even go outside in daylight. Your albinism is known to us, Sorceress Alira replied. We shall take precautions to protect you from overexposure to ultraviolet rays. Come. The Queen King wishes an audience with you at once. Blimey, Eric said. He could rise now, and slid over the edge of the bed. Someone had undressed him during the night. He was now wearing what looked like black silk pajamas tied with a white belt and black slippers. Am I dressed well enough for an audience with the royalty, love? Your clothing was filthy, Sorceress Alira replied. It is being decontaminated. Until then, you wear the traditional garb of one of our city workers. The Queen King does not care about sartorial elegance. She has urgent matters to discuss with you. Wonderful, Eric said. He felt a sore bump at the back of his head. I'll say one thing. If all the birds here are as gorgeous as you, I'm in heaven. Sorceress Illyra laughed. Eric stared at her. Was she taking the piss? I apologize, the tanned lady said. I do not mean to deride your compliment, and I thank you, but to compare my looks with those of the Queen King is absurd. Why? Eric asked. Is she not a looker? She is the most beautiful woman in all of Albiona, Sorceress Illyra replied. Men weep when they first glimpse her face. She is called a living goddess, as you will soon discover. Come, enough delay. She led him out of the drawing room into a red velvet flocked corridor dimly lit by flickering gas lamps. 4. She blinded me with science. Sorceress Illyra and 2 armed guards in wolf helmets led Eric toward the Queen King Asquith's audience room, which was beyond 2 huge white doors carved with blue tigers. The room was mostly empty space, but at the end was a huge bronze throne, and seated on the throne was the most beautiful woman Eric had ever seen or even dreamed of, Queen King Asquith of Albiona. She was tall and elegant, dressed in a purple leather catsuit that caressed a figure even more stunning than his Aunt Val's, equally lean, long-legged, curvy-hipped, and buxom. A gold sash with ornate lettering ran from her left shoulder to her waist, and there was a long silver sword suspended in a scabbard at her left hip. She wore black, low-heeled leather knee boots and a red velvet faux leopard cloak around her shoulders. Her hair was red gold like a setting sun, topped with a slender gold coronet with a single great sapphire that must weigh 100 carats, and her eyes were pale purple gray. Her face was round, with a slim forehead and high cheekbones. She looked slightly Scandinavian. She was, indeed, a goddess in the flesh. She was so beautiful that Eric felt a tear flow down his cheek as he gazed up at her. My lady, Sorceress Illyra said, I present to you your champion, Eric of Marylebone. Eric bowed to the waist and fell to his knees before Queen King Asquith. He could hardly speak. He felt literally stunned by her otherworldly beauty. Your Majesty, Eric coughed, I am your humble servant. Command me as you would. Rise, Sir Champion, King Asquith said. Come, sit by my right side that we may talk confidentially. She patted an elegant gold chair with red velvet cushions on a step below her throne to the right. He obediently came and sat in the chair. I know you're confused, Sir Champion, Queen King Asquith said. That is always the way with those who travel the moonbeam roads. Memories become jumbled, time becomes fractured or distorted. But you are here now, and I have urgent need of your power, for our war with the Franco-Belgians goes badly. You're at war with France and Belgium? Eric said. What about Germany and Russia? The Empire of Germania fell to a combined cavalry flanking attack and aerial bombardment by the Franco-Belgian air armada last spring, Asquith explained. As for Tsarina Anastasia, she has not committed herself or her forces to the war. She is waiting, I believe, to see who wins so she can make the best treaty possible for peaceful cooperation. Anastasia? Eric asked. Anastasia Romanov? Of course, Queen King Asquith replied. She lived in this version of history. There was no Russian Revolution, no communists, Eric mused. Oh, there were communists, Queen King Asquith said, but Duchess Alexandra's forces crushed them utterly in the Battle of St. Sophia 20 years ago. All right, Eric said. Those facts are very different from the history I know. But tell me about the war with these Franco-Belgians. Why are you losing? Their forces greatly outnumber ours, Queen King Asquith replied. In addition, their Empress Sophia the Great is in league with Duke Ariok of Chaos. They have chaos weapons which cannot be destroyed by normal means, and our sorcery is weak compared to theirs. Sorcery, Eric said. This war is fought by means of science and magic? Yes, Queen King Asquith replies. It reflects the larger conflict, the struggle for power between the forces of chaos and law, and the internal struggles which affect the cosmic balance in subtle and intricate ways. I fail to see how I can help, Eric confessed. You will forgive me, Your Majesty, but I'm neither a soldier nor a sorcerer. Nevertheless, the lovely ruler said, your coming was foretold in our Crimson Chronicle 10,000 years ago. You shall bear the red sword, Fire Spitter, and shall lead my tiger troops into a great and final battle with the Franco-Belgians. What is this red sword? Eric asked. It seems odd, but I seem to have heard of it before, even before I came here. It is a chaos weapon. Queen King Asquith said. It resides in the Great Armory. Some say it was the battle blade of Queen Siombarg of Chaos herself. Others claim it is merely a reflection or avatar of Siombarg's own blade. It may only be born in battle by her chosen champion, and you are that champion. How can I be? Eric countered. I've never even heard of Queen Siombarg of Chaos. Perhaps you have, but under another name, Queen King Asquith said. Not that it matters. You are her champion, whether you believe it or not. It is time to reunite you with the Red Sword. You shall be given riding clothes and a tiger. It is time you got acquainted with my London, Eric of Marylebone. 5. I love living in the city. Eric had been given armor, and it took the devil's own time to get it on. First, there were there were padded long johns and padded booties for his feet. Next came pants and a long-sleeved shirt made of heavy chainmail. Over this, he had to pull on leather breeches, a metal cup to protect his groin, and a leather vest. Over the vest, he was helped into a thick leather jacket with armored sleeves and shoulder pads, and a pair of overbreeches with metal greaves to protect his knees. Last, he pulled on metal-shod leather knee boots. How he could hardly move when the cumbersome armor was all buckled, bolted, and screwed on. How on earth was he expected to fight in this ridiculous kit? A soldier brought him one of the blue tigers to meet Eric. He stepped back, terrified of the huge cat. But it was as gentle as a kitten, and actually purred and rubbed its huge head against him. This is Sarkala, the soldier said. She is sister to Queen King Asquith's own tiger, Salitha. Will she accept me as a rider? Eric asked. He saw the big saddle and the long pike attached by straps on her broad back. Yes, the soldier nodded. To guide her, lean the way you want her to go. Kick with your boots into her flanks if you want her to speed up. Pull back on the reins and she will slow down. To show affection, scratch behind her ears. She will obey your commands more readily if she is happy. Sounds easy enough, Eric admitted. Why do tigers here have 8 legs? These are chaos beasts, the soldier replied. They reflect the 8-rayed arrow of chaos in their physical attributes. Oh, Eric said. He didn't understand, but thought better of asking it for a deeper explanation. With the help of 2 lovely Queen's guards, Eric was lifted up into the saddle on Sarkala's broad back. The tiger seemed to have taken an instant liking to him, and was easily guided out of the stable to meet up with Asquith and her retinue. Forming a column, 5 tigers wide and 15 long, they proceeded down a broad lane of bluish-green grass that would, in his London, be Marylebone Road. It was strange to see familiar landscapes, but without familiar landmarks. Where was the round dome of Madame Tussaud's famous wax museum? There was the corner, but no museum. Eric asked Queen King Asquith about the odd buildings shaped like women. They are etheric detection ports, Queen Asquith replied. They protect our empire from aerial attack by turning blue when airships approach. The shade of blue tells us how many there are, and they emit a noise which can be translated into mathematical symbols which give us height and range. We can then send our ships to intercept them. Chain home radar, Eric said. You've got your own version of Dowding's chain home system. Brilliant. Thank you, Sorcerer Salira, writing to his right, said. The towers were my idea. I found a design for them in an ancient alchemical text. The Franco-Belgians cannot seem to guess how we are blocking their air raids, Queen King Asquith replied. But their own sorcerers will counter us sooner or later. We cannot rely on the towers alone to protect us. The column rode past Regent Park to the north. Is London Zoo still there? Eric asked. He needed to know if there were any familiar landmarks in this version of London. Of course, Queen King Asquith replied, but the animals have all been evacuated to safer quarters due to the threat of aerial bombardment. How sad, Eric reflected, an empty zoo. They rode on down toward where Marylebone Road became Euston Road and on eastward. Here, Eric saw the first buildings that resembled those he knew. There was a block of shops, restaurants, a pub, and several apartment flats. This looks more like my London, Eric commented. He was admiring the Gothic architecture of a rather arcane-looking church when a cry came from the rear of the column. Archers, a woman's voice yelled. Partisans, shield bearers to the fore, protect the Queen King and our champion. 6. Shot from both sides. Eric heard the faint twang of bowstrings and saw a few arrows fly from the windows of a tenement block. Then there were hundreds of them. like a flight of angry bees screaming across the sky toward them. He hunched down and lay as flat as he could across the tiger's back. He pulled on his wolf-shaped armored helmet. It was stuffy and heavy, but it would protect his head from arrows. 6 riders bearing huge wooden shields galloped to the front of the column. They raised their shields to form a solid wall. Eric heard arrows thud into the shield wall. He was too scared to look up at the action. "Order an airstrike on that building," Queen King Asquith shouted. From behind him, Eric heard bowstrings twanging in response to the partisans' attack. A man fell from the 4th floor, an arrow protruding from a black domino mask. He was dressed in a strange cyan blue uniform with canary yellow shoulder epaulets and scarlet leather knee boots. The archery attack was only a feint. Soon a column of armored warriors in silver steel helmets, riding what looked like enormous gecko lizards, emerged from a back alley to confront the Albionans. One of them shouted something in an odd language. It sounded vaguely French, but there was also something else mixed in with it. Oddly, Eric found that he could understand the weird warriors, who were all women. "Giota, flank left," the leader instructed. One of the leaders spurred her lizard and 6 warriors wheeled left. "Carmilla, flank right," the leader barked. Another 6 women galloped right. They were going to try and encircle Queen King Asquith's troops. "They're trying a pincer's move," Eric shouted. He was still hunched down on his tiger, but dared look out the eye slits at the opposing enemy column. "Cut them off!" "Do as the champion says," Queen King Asquith ordered. "Stop them from encircling us." The tigers bore down on the Franco-Belgian column and crushed them between them. One of them threw her pike and impaled a slender blonde beauty through the abdomen. Eric felt nauseated at the sight of the gory fight that ensued. Pikewomen from both sides jabbed, poked, and killed their enemies at close range. Eric felt helpless to assist his comrades in arms. He was no soldier. He had no martial training. All he could do was watch the sickening slaughter. Suddenly, Eric's own tiger was cut from the Queen King Asquith's column. A tall, buxom brunette warrior was bearing down on him with her battle lizard. Eric panicked. What should he do? He instinctively grabbed for his silver-tipped pike. It was so heavy he could barely lift it. 2 more Franco-Belgian lizard riders moved to circle him. "Help me!" Elric shouted. "They have me surrounded." "This is the one we want," a fat blonde woman with a pretty face hollered. "He is the profane queen's champion." "I will spit him for her," the tall brunette replied. She feinted at him with her pike. Eric ducked back and wheeled Sarkala, who roared and hissed at the lizards. "No, idiot," the blonde reprimanded her companion. "Do not harm him. Lord Arioch wants him alive." Eric swiped and feinted at the Franco-Belgian riders with his pike, but he was no good at fighting. His armor felt as if he weighed 1,000 stone, and he could hardly move, let alone fend them off. One of the women hacked at him, and he raised his pike to block her, but her blow was so hard that it split and splintered. Now he was unarmed, helpless, and desperate. He felt panic rising up his spine. Where were the Albionans? He was alone. He had only had one option. He must summon his chaos patron. "Queen Xiombarg, help me! Aid me!" Eric shouted inside his stuffy wolf helmet. "Your champion is imperiled." Suddenly there was a brilliant crimson flash, and all 4 lizard riders were engulfed in a whirlwind of flame. In seconds, the rider's flesh was consumed by the fire. The lizard mouths screeched hideously in sheer agony. The warriors and their lizards were singed to screaming skeletons, and then merely columns of ash, as Eric watched, horrified, as the vortex of chaos fire annihilated their very atoms. From the center of the whirling firestorm stepped a beautiful young woman in silver armor. Her eyes were all the colors of smoke, and her voice was like crackling flame. "Who are you? Who dares summon the Fire Queen Xiombarg the Beautiful of Chaos?" the young woman asked. "I am Eric Porterfield von Beck," Eric said. He did not often speak his entire name. Countess Delilah von Beck, his mother, had died in childbirth. Porterfield was his Aunt Valerie's name. Since she had raised him, he took her name before his own ancestral name. "I am your champion, and my friends are surrounded. Please help us." "Know this, Eric of Marylebone," Queen Xiombarg replied. "I helped you only because you are an instrument of my victory over Arioch, but do not count on my aid. I am a Chaos Lord. I do as I please." Then, in contrast to her gruff speech, she kissed him passionately. Eric felt a strange fire ignite inside him and a spark of something dark, powerful, and dangerous. "You are now mine, sweet slave," Siombarg said. "Go, see the red blade, and fulfill your destiny." She vanished in a blue-white flare like a gas flame from a butane lighter. 7. Sonic Reducer. Overhead, 3 huge Albionan air dreadnoughts, airships painted with the Union Jack, droned and hovered over the partisans' hideout. Sticks of 250-pound bombs fell from external bomb racks and hammered the building. A huge explosion rocked the street, and Eric reeled in his saddle. He spurred Sarkala back toward the remaining Albionan riders. The partisans' building burst into flames and began to collapse under the bombardment. To be on the safe side, airships bombed 4 nearby buildings to rubble as well. Eric rejoined Queen King Asquith. He was glad to see her, but apparently the feeling was not mutual. Rather than thanking him for his assistance with the battle, she cuffed him across the face with her armored gauntlet. "Idiot!" the beautiful leader chided him. "You summoned Queen Siombarg in the middle of a street fight? You have given our position away to the forces of Chaos. Ariok's troops will hound us the whole way now. We had the battle in hand." "I was about to be killed," Eric spat. His face stung from the blow. "The pike women had me surrounded. I didn't know what else to do. I told you I am not a soldier." "They broke your pike as well, I see," Queen King Asquith said. "Armorers, fetch the champion a new pike, then show him how to use it properly." She rode away, angry. Eric felt stunned and hurt by her rebuke. Didn't she realize that he had summoned Siombarg to her aid as well? He felt a bit sorry for himself at that moment. Did he deserve the Queen King's ire for his rash actions? What else could he have done? As he brooded, 2 women rode up from the back column. One handed him a new pike. "Raise your weapon," the second warrior commanded. "I will show you how to fight off mounted attackers properly." Eric frowned. Did he really want to be taught how to kill? Still, he had little choice. The lesson went on until his arms ached and his back was stiff and sore, but he now knew how to fight from tigerback. "You must not take Queen King Asquith's rebuke so personally," Sorceress Alira said. She had sidled up to her tiger up to Eric. "I was only trying to defend her," Eric replied. "She knows that," Alira said, "but she is a monarch and must think of all of her people, not just one. You left her in a vulnerable position by summoning Queen Siombarg. We must be extra vigilant now. Ariok can sense the presence of his enemies." "Then you'd better get me to the Great Armory and guide me to the Red Sword," Eric replied. "Queen Siombarg mentioned it." It's not for now," Sorceress Alira replied. She put a hand on Eric's shoulder. "She will forgive you. Don't look so dejected. You shall still be lovers." "What?" Eric said. He was taken aback by Alira's words. "She fancies me? Is that what you're saying?" "In her own way," Alira said. "You will become lovers. It is your destiny. It was foretold in the Crimson Chronicle." "I've got to read this book of yours," Eric said. "I'm starting to enjoy it." 8. Fire of Unknown Origin. The Tiger column turned down Gower Street. The storied buildings of University College were absent in Queen King Asquith's London. In their place stood 3 of the woman-shaped etheric detectors and 4 or 5 housing flats. Peddlers and merchants sold fruit, books, stores, shoes, hats, and ladies' apparel from street curb stalls and ragged tents. One of the peddlers, a strangely beautiful young man with golden eyes, smiled at Eric and offered him a large crimson melon. Eric shook his head no and spurred Sarkala on, but something about the youth haunted him for several blocks as the column moved southward. Signs of the war became more evident. There were burned houses and blackened streets. Small bomb craters could be seen amongst the dormitories and classroom buildings of the University of London. Air wardens, both male and female, stood at street corners, peering skyward with their binoculars and periscopes, searching for Franco-Belgian airships. At last they reached the foot of Great Russell Street, and Eric realized where the column was bound. "The British Museum," Eric chimed from it as the great building came into sight. "That's where your great armory is located?" "The Museum of Greater Albiona," Sorceress Alira corrected him. "Yes, this is where we house our greatest treasures. The great armory is concealed in a warren of rooms in a hidden sub-basement." Fascinating, Eric said. He slowed Sarkala to a halt and scratched the great beast's ears. He dismounted and waited for the Queen King, and several of her guards to approach. Sorceress Lyra says you know this place, the Queen King said. She slid back her battle visor to reveal her stunning face once more. Eric averted his eyes. Yes, my liege, he replied. In my world, it is the British Museum, a great collection of antiquities renowned the world over. The greatest museum in the world, some call it. That it is, Queen King Asquith said. But as you will soon see, it is much more. A guard came and took Sarkala's reins and patted her great blue head. She chuffed softly. Eric slid from his saddle and walked up the familiar steps to the Museum of Greater Albiona. The marble arch still mimicked a Roman temple, but the figures were different. They were mostly women. Are all of your warriors female? Eric asked. For the first time, he noticed the imbalance of male to female. He had not seen any men at all, save a few grooms and janitors since arriving in Albiona. Not all of them, Asquith answered, but certainly the greatest ones. Queen Boadicea, Queen King Elizabeth I, Mary Queen King of Scots. They walked through the gift shop and into the reading room. At the back wall, there was a small illuminated blue square. It was a lift service button. Eric watched as Queen King Asquith removed her battle helmet and shook out her long red gold hair. Eric was again captivated by her beauty. When she caught him looking, he blushed and averted his eyes to the floor. Do you find me so unattractive that you would rather stare at floor tiles? Queen King Asquith chided him. No, my Queen King, Eric gasped. It is quite the opposite. I found you so beautiful that it hurts my eyes to gaze upon your lovely face and form. Gaze upon me for a few moments longer if you can stand it, she japed. I don't want you to break your fool neck stepping into the lift. He lifted his gaze. She smiled, and his heart leapt into his throat. There was a great groaning noise, like the roar of some rusty beast, followed by a loud bang. The twin doors at the back of the reading room slid open with a tortuous grating whine. Clearly, the hidden lift had not been used in a long time. A great cloud of gray-blue dust accosted him and covered their clothing as the lift doors opened. Eric coughed and hastily covered his mouth. They climbed into the lift together with Sorceress Lyra and 4 guards. The doors groaned shut, and 2 gas lamps lit the dim interior of the box-shaped elevator. Eric was nearly thrown off his feet by a thunderous jolt that started their descent to the hidden sub-basement of the Museum of Greater Albiona. The lift slammed to a halt, throwing Eric into Queen King Asquith's arms. For a moment, he thought she meant to kiss him, but she pushed him to arm's length and straightened up. There will be time for romance after the battle, my friend, Queen King Asquith promised. She smiled, and Eric felt faint. A set of doors slid open, revealing a circular, illuminated space. Behold, the great armory, Sorceress Lyra said. She led the party into the chamber. She pointed to a long silver pike carved with strange black runes. The battle pike of Alma the Great, first Queen King of Albiona. A glass case held a giant wooden bow painted black and decorated with white hearts. The bow Raven's Claw, Lyra declaimed, the weapon with which Queen King Harriet used to slay Empress Wilhelmina the Conqueror in 1066 A.D., stopping the planned Norman invasion in its tracks. They passed the long sword of Queen King Regina the Lionheart and the crossbow of Jane Lackland. They saw the battle axe of Elizabeth I, used to behead her enemy, Queen Isabella of Spain. Finally, they came to a long glass case, illuminated from above by a dim yellow gas lamp. Inside was a blade as red as blood, carved with glowing yellow runes that seemed to smoke, emitting light blue-black curls of shadow under the gaslight. Fire Spitter, the sword of Queen Siombarg's champion, Lyra said. Eric stared at the 5-foot broadsword and felt the ember Queen Siombarg had implanted via her kiss ignite within his heart and mind. Here was the finest weapon ever forged, and it was meant for him alone. You must take it, Sorceress Lyra said. She unlocked the glass case and exposed the sword to the dusty air. It would burn any of us should we try to grasp it. Eric reached in and grabbed the rune sword by its leather-wrapped hilt, and then he felt afraid. It was as if he had been born again, and that this rune sword was born with him. It was as if they had never been separate. Fire Spitter, he whispered. and the sword settled more surely into his hands. He felt the flames within the blade burning him to the very core of his being, consuming him, destroying each atom with an agony of scorching pain. He knew the true nature of the Fire Queen Siomborg, flame of chaos. He knew that this was the original flame, the fire of the beginning, the Big Bang itself. He screamed in both horror and triumph as the great world flame blazed through every cell of his being and reshaped him into its own image. Fire Spitter, he shouted. It was a shout of sheer and utter joy at becoming one with the sacred and profane flame. When he held this blade, he controlled the very creative elements of the multiverse, the forge of the stars, the galaxies, the nebulae. Fire Spitter! The others backed away when they saw the fire madness sweep into Eric into its blaze. It seemed to them that the yellow runes carved into the sword's long fuller blazed with internal light, and that Eric's own eyes reflected that light, turning from their normal albino pink to flame red. Eric fought to control the inferno raging inside him. He struggled and suppressed the great flame that had overtaken his soul to quench the heart fire that had ignited inside his bones. Finally, he sheathed the sword across its back, its flame red scabbard. He was covered in sweat, but he did not feel uncomfortably warm. He had become the flame, and it had become him. Yes, Eric said quietly to Queen King Asquith, I am the champion of the Red Sword. Let us go and find your enemies. The time for the triumph of Albiona has come. 10. Street Fighting Man. The moment the Queen King's party exited the Museum of Greater Albiona, they knew something was horribly wrong. The grooms and guards that left holding the tigers were gone, as were the beasts themselves. A keening siren filled the air. Eric looked up and saw the looming shapes of a great fleet of Franco-Belgian airships, their hulls painted black and gold, with the fleur-de-lis design of Empress Sophia the Great painted on their noses. From ropes hanging beneath the gondolas of the airships, troopers dressed in black and gold armor slid down to the streets. It is as I suspected, Queen King Asquith said. Empress Sophia's stormtroopers have penetrated our guard spells. The great battle itself is about to begin. Here we must take our stand or lose Albiona to the Franco-Belgian matriarchy. As the troops hit the street, they scattered, hiding behind bomb-blasted walls and cratered streets. A rain of arrows fell from the sky. Alira raised her slender arms and made runic gestures. A curtain of blue air formed between the Albionans and the attackers. The arrows that hit the barrier dissolved and vanished. I cannot hold this spell for long, Alira said. I can feel Ariok's dark magic working against me. Eric, use Fire Spitter. We must show them what they dare attack and make them afraid. Eric nodded and drew the rune blade. The fire within ignited, and he was no longer himself, but an instrument of Queen Siomborg's will. Eric charged through the blue barrier and ran up Gower Street toward the broken walls of a fish and chips shop. He had seen 4 Franco-Belgian soldiers scramble behind the wall to hide. Come face me, cowards! Eric shouted to the enemy fighters. In response, an arrow flew at his chest. He slashed Fire Spitter so swiftly that it sliced the arrow in half before it reached him. Is that the best you can do? I laugh at Empress Sophia's elite warriors. The taunt worked. 2 swordsmen emerged from the shattered shop, weapons drawn. Ariok, aid us, they shouted beneath their lizard-shaped helmets. Blood and foals for our Lord Ariok. You'll need more than Ariok's help, Eric shouted. The great fire of Queen Siomborg filled his very bones with its scorching joy. He screamed like a madman and fell upon the warriors, hacking wildly with Fire Spitter. The first fighter was well trained and parried his blows expertly, but she could not stop the fury of the original flame. Eric cut, hacked, and hammered at her until her black blade shattered. Fire Spitter seemed to leap at her with its own will, splitting her helmet and her skull in a mighty arc. She screamed as Queen Siomborg's fire blasted her to a smoking skeleton inside her armor. The second warrior threw down her sword and fled, but Eric hurled the rune sword and impaled her through the lower back. She shrieked in sheer agony as the yellow runes flared and her body was vaporized by a great gout of crimson flame. Flesh and bone, Queen Siomborg, Eric promised his chaos patron. Flesh and bone for the original flame. Eric quickly pulled the blade from the dead warrior's smoldering armor and advanced up the street, fighting Franco-Belgians. Franco-Belgians were sliding down from the airships, some armed with pikes, others with arrows or swords. They came at him in a great column. Resolute, the champion eternal stood with the great sword held before him as the column of enemy soldiers marched towards him. Then, suddenly, they stopped. Standing in the street before him was the strange golden-eyed youth he had seen near the Museum of Greater Albiona. The young man smiled and nodded his head and vanished. Where the young man had stood moments before, there was now a woman warrior, an albino beauty like no other he had ever seen before, wielding a terrible black sword carved with red glowing runes. The sword gave off a weird black radiance and murmured as if alive. "Who are you?" Eric demanded of his bizarre foe. She seemed disturbingly familiar. "I am Elwyn of Brussels," beautiful warrior replied, "though some call me the Eternal Champion." "I am also called the Eternal Champion," Eric replied. "How can we both be the same thing?" "We aren't, exactly," Elwyn laughed, "but we are aspects of the same being. We should not fight. We should be on the same side. Both Ariak and Siambar serve chaos. Fight with me. Aid my empress in subduing the world for chaos." "Never," Eric shouted. He took up a battle stance. "I fight for England. Chaos be damned. This is my city, and no French invader shall have it." "You are a fool," Elwyn said, "but soon you shall be a dead fool, and I shall feed your soul to Lord Ariok." She leapt at him, her black blade howling through the air over his head. The two blades clashed, and there was a great scream, as if the universe itself was wounded and crying out in agony. 9. Angels of Death. The two rune blades, Fire Spitter, the emblem of the original flame, and the black sword, sometimes known as Stormbringer and other times as Kenajena, were never meant to meet in battle. The Chaos Lords claimed to have forged the swords for their own purposes, but in truth, the blades were older than even the Lords of the Chaos themselves. "Die, upstart English dog," Elwyn screamed. She brought the black blade down in a lashing arc, but Eric dodged her death blow and aimed at her unarmored stomach. She danced back just in time. The blades clashed and the multiverse shuddered. Suddenly, the battlefield shifted. They were no longer in Queen King Asquith's shattered London, but on a silver heath with cerulean pine trees and lilac ravens screaming overhead. In place of airships, great Chinese dragons breathed fire and venom in the air above. The two combatants, through the chaos power contained within their rune blades, had crossed the moonbeam roads and stood at the threshold of a million worlds. Whole universes blossomed and vanished as their blades met, and sparks flew. In one world, Eric was a red-haired woman with green eyes, her sword called a Durandal. In another, it was Elwyn who had changed into a tall albino with mad red eyes and a haunted look on a bone-white face. Eric seemed to know him, but could not speak his name. In another, they were both gigantic beetles, clashing not with swords but huge, jagged foreclaws. The sight of the shifting realities would have driven some mad, but Eric merely laughed as he fought a zebra-headed assassin, a shark-faced priest of Fum, and a red-haired Elwarian Thuggee. This was no worse than one of Mad Aunt Val's lipstick poison trips. They fought madly for hours, perhaps centuries, each the equal, neither champion gaining any advantage. But then Elric found a way to access his own history and slipped away from the battlefield. He had found a war-winning weapon. He had found a Spitfire. Eric laughed wildly, sheathed Fire Spitter, and jumped into the cockpit. He clicked on his Sutton harness and turned on the magneto switches. He set the fuel valves to rich mix and the propeller to constant pitch. He set the flaps to full and checked his guns. Still laughing wildly, he opened the throttle and heard the throaty leopard purr of the Merlin engine and the frame vibrate as the Spitfire came to life. He had done this 1,000 times before, in his dreams. Eric shoved the throttle forward and pulled back on the flight stick and felt the plane lift into the air. He turned and banked and willed himself back into Queen King Asquith's universe. After a few tense moments, he saw the huge black cigar shapes of the Franco-Belgian airship fleet. Laughing, he dove down out of the sun, his .303 caliber machine guns barking in a short, jagged bursts. Orange tracers screamed through the dark skies and streaked toward the first airship. In seconds, her airbags were ruptured and the ship exploded in a glorious bloom of brilliant crimson, orange, and blue flame. The skin of the airship cracked and peeled, exposing the skeletal steel frame, which bent and warped. The airship fell to the ground and killed a dozen Franco-Belgian soldiers who had been advancing on Queen King Asquith's forces. Eric aimed at the second airship. A second burst of yellow tracers sped past his nose. He looked into the rearview mirror and saw, to his horror, Elwyn in the cockpit of a Messerschmitt Bf 109 K14 closing on his 6. 10. God save the Queen King. Eric banked sharply to his starboard, pulling it hard into a split S position. He had seen the maneuver in movies, but had never realized how hard it was on the body. His arms ached and his vision blurred as the G-forces nearly caused him to black out. Finally, on the tail of Elwyn's black and gold plane, he lined up the fleur-de-lis in his gun sight and fired a 10-second burst. Flames spat from the wings and fuselage, and Elwyn's 109 spiraled into a death roll. Before the damaged fighter crashed into the head of Gower Street, Elwyn managed to parachute to safety. Eric landed his Spitfire in a small clearing and turned off the engine. He saw Elwyn lying in a heap on the road ahead. She had survived, but broken both legs in the fall. "Don't think you've won, Siombarg's fool," Elwyn spat. This world is an insignificant speck. Arioch has dominion over 1,000 greater Earths. That may be so, Eric said, but his reign in Albiona is over. He drew Fire Spitter from her scabbard. The rune sword practically screamed with glee in anticipation of dispatching Elwyn. "Before you kill me, remember 2 things, Elwyn said. 1, you have forgotten something that may imperil your own London. 2, Queen King Asquith is not who she seems. Ask yourself this question: why does your beautiful aunt never age?" "Enough riddles," Eric said. "It's time to end this war." But before he could kill Elwyn, she touched a red gem set in a gold ring on her left hand and vanished. Cruel laughter echoed in the air. Queen King Asquith, her hair in a tangle, armor spattered with blood and gore, waded through dead Franco-Belgians and embraced Eric and kissed him. "You have saved Albiona," Asquith said, "just as the Red Chronicle predicted." "Yes," Eric mused, "but at what price?" The remaining Albiona forces gathered. Tigers were brought, including Eric's own Sarkala, and they mounted and returned in triumph along the Marylebone Road to Bletchley Manse. All of the Franco-Belgian airships have been destroyed, and the cream of her armors defeated. "They may attack again," Queen King Asquith said, "but they'll think twice about it. They will need time to gather their forces, and we will strengthen ours doubly." Once they arrived and had cleaned up, there was a great feast prepared in the banquet hall. To show her gratitude to all of her people, Queen King Asquith allowed even the servants to eat with her soldiers. "Here's to our champion, Eric of Marylebone," Asquith said. She looked stunning in a crushed red velvet gown and red gloves, the gold sash of Albiona once more over her left shoulder, red gold hair cascading down over her bronzed skin. "Eric, Eric, Eric," the crowd shouted. They carried him around the table on their shoulders, and many of the women kissed him. They then led him to Queen King Asquith's private chambers and left the 2 of them alone. "Now to fulfill the last of the prophecy," Queen King Asquith smiled. "Come to me, my champion eternal, and help me out of this cumbersome dress." Eric found out why Asquith was called, quote-unquote, Queen King, for she possessed hermaphrodite sex organs and was equally and magnificently skilled at using both of them. As they lay upon the red satin sheets, sweaty and bathed in the afterglow of intense lovemaking, Eric had a terrible nagging at the back of his brain. He was thinking about what Elwyn of Brussels had said before she vanished. What had she meant about his London being imperiled? Then he sat bolt upright, his pink eyes filled with terror. "The buzz bomb!" Eric shouted. "I forgot about the buzz bomb. I have to stop it." "What are you talking about?" Asquith asked. "What is a buzz bomb?" "Something I suspect the Franco-Belgians are working on even now," Eric said. "A terror weapon, a flying bomb that can be launched from France and hit England. In my world, it was the Germans who invented them. They killed thousands of Londoners. When I was transported here, I saw one. It blew up Baker Street tube station. I have to stop it." "If this event has already taken place, how can you prevent it?" Queen King Asquith asked. "What's done is done." Eric ran across the room and quickly dressed. He pulled the scabbard and fire spitter from a wall nail. "I can stop it with this," Eric said, drawing the rune sword. "And with the Spitfire. Forgive me, my love, but I must go. He kissed her passionately and deeply, then ran from the palace at breakneck speed. 12. Veteran of the Psychic Wars. Eric unbuckled his breastplate, greaves, and gauntlets and left them on the palace floor as he made a mad dash. He wore a floppy gray fedora he'd found in Queen King Asquith's wardrobe closet and a black silk scarf to shield his face from the bright midday sun. He still wore his mail gloves, so his hands were protected as well. He jumped into the cockpit of his still-waiting Spitfire. He started her up and climbed into the cerulean sky and bid Albiona farewell. Using the power of Fire Spitter and the little magic he'd learned during the battle with Elwyn, Eric shifted from Queen King Asquith's dimension to his own. He scanned the skies, his head whirling madly. At first he could not see the V1 anywhere. Perhaps Elwyn's pronouncements had been lies, a trick to lure him away from Albiona. But as he banked port over the Thames, he saw the dim outline of the buzz bomb and heard the telltale red glow of the Argus pulse jet engine motor atop her slim profile. Eric pushed his throttle to full, feeling the G-forces slam him back against the uncomfortable metal seat. He lined up the tiny cross shape of the V1 in his sights. It was still too far away for a good deflection shot. He climbed to 25,000 feet and dove again, adding speed. Sweat poured from his forehead and his hands shook on the flight stick. Finally, he was in range. He fired a 10-second burst and missed. Then his guns clicked empty. He was out of ammo. Panicked, Eric realized he would have to execute a dangerous maneuver. He would have to, quote-unquote, tip the V1 into the English Channel, placing his starboard wing under the buzz bomb's port wing and literally smacking it out of control with his wingtip. He lined up and pulled to port and felt the slight thump of his plane's wing tip hit the buzz bomb. He sighed with relief as it spiraled out of control and plunged into the sea. There was a gush of white water as it exploded harmlessly in the channel. Eric set his Spitfire down to the amazement of a small crowd of tourists and sightseers in Regent's Park. He turned off the engine and jumped out of the cockpit. Sliding off the port wing, he hit the ground running. He had to see Mad Aunt Valerie to make sure she was okay. Fire Spitter felt heavy and hot on his back. There was a strange thud noise and a great thunderclap from behind him. The Spitfire had returned to its own time stream. "Where in Smeg's name were you?" Mad Aunt Valerie asked. She looked at her gold Rolex disapprovingly. "I've been waiting 20 minutes, young man." Eric took his beloved aunt in his arms and kissed her with all the passion and fury he'd been unable to express to Queen King Asquith. On his back, Fire Spitter glowed brilliantly, illuminating the ornate Art Deco furnishings of his Aunt Valerie's posh flat in Kensington Road. Rosewood dragons and tigers were painted in a brilliant crimson glow as the kiss lingered. "My," Aunt Valerie laughed as she broke the kiss. "Wherever you were, I approve of the results." Eric gave Aunt Valerie a long, appraising look. What Elwyn said was true. His aunt was nearly 65, and she was still as beautiful and young as she'd been at 35. How was that possible? There were no crow's feet under her eyes, nor any neck wattles. Her forehead was high and smooth, her cheeks rosy with the blush of youth. Her body was supple and magnificent as it has always been. "Have you ever heard of Queen Siombarg of Chaos?" Eric asked. He slowly undressed for the night's coming passion, but laying his mail gloves on and hat on a teak chest. He unbuckled Fire Spitter carefully and laid it across the seat of a red velvet Louis XIV chair. "Siombarg?" Val asked. "No, can't say I've heard of her. Who is she?" "Someone I met courtesy of your lipstick hallucinogens," Elric concluded. "Just what was that stuff?" "Something new," Valerie admitted. "I think it's called Firestorm." "Did a hell of a job on me," Eric said. "I was in another dimension, and I had to battle monsters and fight Belgian airships. Got that little pig sticker there as a souvenir." He pointed to Fire Spitter, which, unlike the airplane, had not disappeared into another dimension. Auntie Val, still dressed in her comely black catsuit with the strategically positioned flames, sashayed over to the sword and drew it out. She held it aloft and seemed to read the runes along the filler. As Eric watched, the blade seemed to pour energy into her, to bathe her in all the colors of the original flame: crimson, canary, smoke, ash, and blue-white energies colliding and washing over her like a waterfall of sorcerous energy. For a moment, as Eric watched stunned, the flame made her look like the spitting image of Queen King Asquith. "This is a fine toy," Valerie laughed. She sheathed Fire Spitter and sashayed back across the room on her spiked heels. She took Eric into her arms and kissed him so hard he felt as if his spine would melt. "Auntie Val, why do you never age?" "What?" Valerie laughed. "Don't be a dolt, Eric. Maybe that lipstick poison is too strong." "But you should be an old woman," Eric said. "You've been voted the best butt in Britain for 10 years in a row. There's not one wrinkle on you, and you're nearly 65. How is that possible?" "Good genes, darling," Valerie lied. "Your mom had them, too. God rest her soul. Now let's go. I have a new strap-on to test out." She led him into the bedroom, smiling secretly. For just a moment, Eric saw Siombarg reflected in his aunt's irises, smiling wickedly and triumphantly. The end.